bones, explosives, and locomotives. Dan Lopez is a Vernon, New Jersey-based modern-day explorer who has visited at least 179 abandoned mines and entered 50 or more throughout the northeastern U.S. Throughout his adventures, he's experienced an array of shocking and disturbing sights, including dynamite, bones, and even a ghost. Since 2003, Lopez has ventured into mines with other explorers too, who have traveled deep into forests and down deep shafts to find things like abandoned rail tracks, coal carts, and a rusting 19th century locomotive left frozen in time. According to a 2018 NorthJersey.com article documenting his investigations, one time Lopez almost fell into a crevice and to his death. Lopez also entered a mine in one town and amazingly emerged in another. His passion for mines is fueling an ongoing campaign to bring attention to their historic value, which he says the government seems intent on burying, both literally and figuratively, as sites are increasingly being reclaimed and filled in. Thankfully, Lopez has documented these eerie, forgotten sites through his photography, which can be found on his Flickr page. Number 9. Demonic Whispers. In 2016, while exploring the tunnels of a place called the Waldeck Mine, a YouTuber who goes by the name of Frank captured footage of a series of unexplainable overlapping whispers that he at first thought were birds or snakes. As soon as the man realized he was hearing something that was perhaps not of this world, he quickly turned around and hightailed it back toward the mine's entrance. The disturbing video appeared on the YouTube channel Exploring Abandoned Mines and has garnered over 6 million views since its debut 6 years ago. While many were shocked by what they heard when they watched the footage, CNET was quick to point out that the channel's profile page included a disclaimer stating, "Everything you see, hear, and read in all my videos is for entertainment purposes only, and should not be relied upon or construed as factual, correct, or remotely accurate." Whether the video is real or not, and regardless of where it was filmed, it's certainly enough to make anyone think twice about venturing into an abandoned mine. Number 8. Clerksdorp Spheres. The Clerksdorp spheres are small, round, and disc-shaped objects that were collected from pyrophyllite mines near Ottosdal, South Africa. They range in diameter from 0.2 inches to almost 4 inches, 0.5 to 10 centimeters, and are composed of either hematite or wollastonite, mixed with small amounts of hematite and goethite, and in some cases pyrite. Since their discovery, the Clerksdorp spheres' origins have been heavily debated by experts and conspiracy theorists alike. Experts concluded that the objects are around 2.8 billion years old and were formed naturally by minerals occupying the space between sediments, much like how crystals are formed, and that their round shape and evenly spaced lines were caused by weathering. Conspiracy theorists, on the other hand, argue that the stones are too perfectly round to have formed naturally, and that they're evidence of ancient aliens having existed. Another bizarre story surrounding the Clerksdorp spheres claims that a man brought some of them to NASA for scientists to examine, and that they told him the balls were formed in a zero-gravity environment. Not surprisingly, there's no reliable evidence to back up these far-flung tales and theories, and researchers who analyzed the spheres disproved outlandish claims of them having perfect balance or being harder than steel. Still, the spheres are fascinating in their own right due to their age, and especially because they truly do seem too perfectly round to be anything but man-made. Number 7. Mystery Monster. In 2016, in the Sakha Republic of far northeastern Russia, Siberian miners unearthed the demonic-looking mummified corpse of a small, unidentified animal. Even those who drew the more reasonable conclusion that it was actually a creature of this earth were puzzled about what exactly it was. The miners who worked at the Udakni diamond mine suggested that the so-called monster mummy was a newly discovered dinosaur species. Meanwhile, experts erred on the more rational side and surmised that it was a young wolverine. They drew this conclusion based on its strong jaws and large canine teeth, which are characteristic of the species, but pointed out that the creature could also be a sable or a ferret-like animal called a pine marten. The remains were transported to Yakutsk for further examination, but one expert named Darian Basinger claimed that she knew what the carcass was just by looking at it. Speaking to Earth Touch News, Basinger, who's worked with mummified remains for years, explained that the animal looked like a Russian fitch, also known as a polecat, which is actually not a cat. This falls in line with other experts' belief that the creature comes from the mustelid family of weasels, ferrets, minks, and martens. Basinger further added that the corpse dried out instead of liquefying because of the region's frigid temperatures, and that the dead body was probably relatively new since the mine has been open for decades. But she admits that without properly analyzing the animal, she could be wrong about its identity. Number 6. Van Meter Creature. Over the course of just a few days back in 1903, the small Iowa town of Van Meter was allegedly terrorized by a stinky half-human, half-animal monster, which had bat wings and a horn emanating a blinding light. It became known as the Van Meter creature or the Van Meter visitor. It emerged from a local mine and spent its first night flying across rooftops. It seemed immune to the gunshots that townsfolk repeatedly fired anytime they saw it. The local doctor and bank teller managed to get a poster cast of the monster's three-toed tracks, and another resident described the creature as hopping like a kangaroo. It was also spotted perched atop a telephone pole. Eventually, locals chased the unwelcome visitor back to the mine, where they heard a demonic sound coming from within. A bright light appeared, and the creature appeared with a smaller version of itself, and they descended down a mine shaft together. Nobody ever saw the Van Meter creature again, and for over a century, the mystery surrounding the bizarre incident has lingered. No evidence was ever found to suggest that the ordeal was a hoax, but tangible signs of the Van Meter creature being real are also conspicuously lacking. Number 5. The Saltmen of Iran. 1700 years ago, around 300 AD, a group of men were working together in a mine in what is now Iran when the roof collapsed and crushed them to death. None of them were discovered until 1993, when miners at the Cherabad salt mine in Zanjan province found the first body, belonging to a man with long, flowing white hair and sporting a gold earring. His remnants didn't look nearly as old as radiocarbon dating proved them to be, leading experts to believe that the dryness of the environment helped to preserve his body while the surrounding salt sucked moisture from his skin. In other words, the man was naturally mummified. 5 more saltmen, as they've become known, have been found since. The second mummy was discovered just 50 feet away from the first in 2004. And in 2005, 2 more were found. The last 2, one of which is actually a woman, were discovered in 2007. Mining practices were stopped at the site in 2008, and it was declared an archaeological site, making it available to researchers. Experts have learned a lot from the mummies, some of whom were so well preserved their internal organs remained intact. One man's stomach contained tapeworm eggs, showing that he ate lots of raw and undercooked meat. Other artifacts were also remarkably well preserved thanks to the salt, including a leather boot containing a foot, iron knives, a pant leg, a silver needle, a sling, leather rope, pottery shards, textile fragments, a walnut, and more. 4 of the 6 mummies found are currently on display in the positions they were found in at the Archaeology Museum in Zanjan. Number 4. Red-haired giants. Lovelock Cave is a small cavern in Churchill County, Nevada, measuring just 150 feet long by 35 feet wide. Humans first used the cave as far back as 2580 BC, and around 1000 BC, people began living in it full-time. Altogether, the human presence inside Lovelock Cave spans roughly 4,000 years. In 1911, 2 men named David Pugh and James Hart were at the site mining bat guano to use as fertilizer. While removing a thick layer of the material measuring somewhere between 3 and 6 feet deep and weighing an estimated 250 tons, 226.8 metric tons, the pair found a collection of artifacts. Unfortunately, they only kept the ones that they deemed to be interesting, and a lot of important archaeological information was likely lost in the process. Eventually, the duo stumbled upon too many objects to continue mining guano in substantial quantities. Their fascinating finds allegedly included the remains of a humongous 6-foot man with red hair. This gave rise to legends of a group of red-haired cannibalistic giants called the Sitka, who supposedly existed in the area centuries ago and stood at up to 10 feet, 3 meters tall. Modern science challenges these stories, citing how the pigment in human hair is unstable after death and can be changed by numerous factors, including temperature and soil content. A study on a collection of bones that was carried out during the mid-1970s determined that there was possibly a separate, more aggressive tribe that passed through the area and terrorized the Paiute, and that its members could have been around 6 feet, 1.8 meters tall on average, according to Nevadagram. As anthropologists pointed out, the myth is likely to bolster over the facts because it's simply more entertaining. Number 3. Dead miners and illicit villages. South African police recently announced the discovery of 20 dead bodies of suspected illegal miners near an abandoned gold mine shaft outside Johannesburg. The corpses were severely burned and wrapped in white plastic bags, according to authorities, who said that they're working to determine the causes of death. A police spokesman said that they believe the individuals were illegal miners that are commonly known as zama-zamas, which means try your luck in Zulu. At any given time, thousands of zama-zamas are operating in the country, with most working in Johannesburg, according to the South African Human Rights Commission, SAHRC. Typically run by crime syndicates, illegal mining is extremely dangerous. Those who dare or are desperate enough to do it run the risk of being hurt or dying from explosives, toxic fume inhalation, collapsing mine shafts, and gang violence, The Guardian reported. There's no shortage of places for them to operate in, with derelict mines numbering around 6,000. Even more shocking, the people who work in these mines spend up to 6 months at a time underground living in small makeshift cities, where commodities like food, alcohol, cell phone minutes, and sex are sold at wildly inflated prices. Number 2. Ice Age Mining Camp. Between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, indigenous miners in what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula risked their lives to mine a pigment called red ochre, traveling deep into pitch-dark caves to retrieve it. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, these caves became filled with water and were forgotten about. In 2017, cave divers explored these impressively well-preserved remnants that the miners left behind, including charcoal from fires that were lit to provide light, stone tools, mining pits, and the red ochre pigment itself. Researchers have long known that the region's earliest human inhabitants ventured into the now submerged caves in the area, known as Quintana Roo, as evidenced by skeletons that have been recovered from there. Until recently, however, nobody knew exactly why people went into the caves. They noticed unexplainable signs of a human presence, including rocks that were out of place and stacked on top of one another, according to study co-author Samuel McComb, who spoke with Live Science. Nobody knows what ancient indigenous people used red ochre for. The samples found at the site contain high levels of arsenic, suggesting the possibility that they were used as a bug repellent. It may have also been used as an antiseptic or sunblock. Red ochre likely had ritualistic uses as well, including in rock paintings and burials. But for now, its purposes remain mystery. Number 1. Murder victims. 2 Utah families were shaken to the core when 17-year-old Berlin Breeze Otteson and 18-year-old Riley Powell disappeared just days after Christmas in 2017. Friends and family searched over 40 mines, but failed to find the missing teens. Months later, police found Otteson and Powell's bodies in Juab County, Utah. Both victims were bound, stabbed, and tossed at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft. Outraged that his girlfriend Morgan Henderson had welcomed the young couple into their home, a man named Jared Baum allegedly committed the murders, killing Powell as his girlfriend watched, then fatally slitting her throat. Baum had reportedly warned Henderson against having male friends over and was furious that she disobeyed this rule, especially since she had briefly dated Powell in the past before the two ultimately decided they were better off as friends. Henderson initially lied and told police she knew nothing of the young couple's whereabouts, but when she was pulled over at a later date and caught with the murder weapons, she confessed what she knew. Baum was charged with Powell and Ottenson's murders. 3 years later, the teens' families are still waiting for justice amid the ongoing trial, and Henderson is a key witness in the proceedings. If convicted, Baum could face the death penalty.
Number 10. The Lady of Elche. Back in 1997, archaeologists found an amazing artifact inside a private estate in Spain. The artifact was a statue, a simple bust of a woman's head. But it's actually hiding its ancient age. It comes from the 4th century BCE and depicts a woman wearing some kind of strange headdress, something that looks similar to something worn by Native American tribes. The statue came to be known as the Lady of Elche. The amazing part of this mystery is that nobody knows exactly who the lady is supposed to represent. The headdress was probably used in ceremonies, suggesting the woman may have been some kind of priestess. The statue was discovered with traces of red, white, and blue paint, very patriotic. So it was once extremely colorful. But nobody can say for sure where the sculpture originated. Some say it came from the ancient Iberian culture, while others believe it has a direct link with Tanit, the old goddess of Carthage. There are even some wilder theories that claim the woman could be a goddess from the lost culture of Atlantis. How cool would that be? Number 9. Jamestown smoking pipes. At Jamestown, fragments of personal smoking pipes dating back 400 years have been found. For those not familiar with Jamestown, it was the first permanent settlement created by English settlers in the New World, or what is now known as the United States of America. The pipes likely belonged to some of the most prominent men in early American history. According to William Kelso, the director of archaeology for historic Jamestown, finding the pipes has brought to light the complicated political and social networks left behind at the settlement's site. These personal pipes were crafted out of clay. with archaeologists estimating they were made between 1608 and 1610. This was a pretty mysterious time in Virginia history. We need to look at just what the settlers of Jamestown were up to. A lot of their success as a settlement depended on doing well for their investors, the Virginia Company. This is who bankrolled the settlers of Jamestown. The pipe suggests that those living in Jamestown were making them in order to butter up their investors when they visited. However, the exact purpose of the mysterious pipes is still unknown. Number 8. Stolen armor. 40 years ago, ancient armor was stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris under mysterious and dubious circumstances. The thief was never apprehended, and the case was never solved. Nobody ever found out how the armor was even stolen. Recently, these pieces of armor were finally found. A military antique expert called the authorities after someone contacted him looking for advice regarding a luxurious helmet and piece of body armor inside their family's collection. After a brief investigation, the pieces of armor were identified as the stolen loot from the museum. Although the mystery of the theft on May 31st, 1983 was never solved, the pieces were finally brought back to the museum. Even more interesting are the artifacts themselves. The pieces of armor are believed to have been made in Milan, Italy, sometime between 1560 and 1580 during the Renaissance. Nobody knows too much about the armor and helmet, other than that they were likely used as ornaments by a rich member of society. The head of heritage artworks at the Louvre compared the set of armor to that of a modern luxury car, giving you a good idea of just how expensive and prestigious these items were roughly 700 years ago. Although an exact price tag has never been put on the pieces, it's likely their value increased due to their strange history. Number 7. The missing gold artifacts. Father Carlos Crespi Croce was born in Italy in 1891. He was a monk who dedicated much of his life to charity. He also resided in the small town of Cuenca, Ecuador, for over 50 years. During this time, he became close to the indigenous people in the area, who often gave him gifts in the form of ancient artifacts. How kind of them. The indigenous people said many of the artifacts came from subterranean tunnels tangled deep inside the jungle. Even more amazing is that the artifacts looked oddly similar to other precious relics discovered in the Far East. This is one of the most interesting and mysterious stories of treasure in the world. To this day, the source of the bizarre artifacts has never been discovered, and some explorers have even been murdered by indigenous people in their hunt to find it. Must be a secret worth protecting. Father Crespi long suggested that the artifacts were somehow linked to the ancient civilization of Babylon. He housed the artifacts in a small museum in Ecuador, but so far as the story goes, mainstream archaeologists weren't happy about his accusations. And somebody mysteriously burned down the museum, which destroyed all the artifacts he had acquired, except for a few that remained untouched by the fire. Before the father died, he hid the remaining artifacts, and they have never been found. One rumor suggests they were shipped to the Vatican and are currently being held in secret down in their archives. Where do you think the artifacts are hidden? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. The oldest spear. In Texas, archaeologists found what they say could be the oldest weapon ever discovered in North America's history, and nobody knows who it once belonged to. The weapon comes in the form of a spear tip, and it's been dated back 15,500 years. The fragment had once been part of a larger weapon, probably used to hunt bigger game like bison or moose. According to Popular Mechanics, the weapon was discovered on a piece of somebody's property by a team of researchers from Texas A&M and the University of Texas. It appears to predate even the famous Clovis culture, often thought to be the oldest group of humans to inhabit the Americas. The Clovis originally appeared 13,000 years ago, 2,500 years after this weapon was crafted. Which begs the question of who the weapon was made by, and if an ancient civilization existed on the American continent farther back than scientists thought. Even with the discovery of the weapon, archaeologists are no closer to figuring out who was living in Texas all that time ago, or where exactly they came from. They can only guess that they were likely some of the earliest settlers on the continent, but scientists don't even have a name for them yet. Number 5. Rare freedman's badge. A resident of Myrtle Beach was out one day with his metal detector, slightly north of Mount Pleasant in the city of Charleston, when he came across an artifact of real historical significance. He was looking around the grounds of a construction site when his metal detector began to beep like crazy. He had found a button from the Revolutionary War. But wait, because there was something else buried in the ground near it. After digging about 4 inches deep, he pulled out something known as a freedman's badge. It had been lost underground for nearly 200 years. According to the metal detectorist himself, named Ralph Fields, he recognized it immediately, but had never seen one before, calling it a lightning strike of a discovery, a once-in-a-lifetime find. What is a freedman's badge, exactly? It's a copper badge that was used in the 1700s in South Carolina before it was even declared a state, and before white slave owners ever feared a rebellion. Only a few hundred of these badges were made, and less than a dozen of them have been found. The city issued the medallions between the years of 1783 and 1789. At the time, there were less than 600 people of African descent living in Charleston as free citizens. They were required to have one of these badges and to display it on their person to signify that they were free. Otherwise, they would be imprisoned or questioned. But of course, this wasn't really a privilege. It was a way for the people at the time to police those of color. Number 4. Duck pond artifacts. During renovations of a small duck pond in Wisconsin, crews discovered some mysterious artifacts from around 1,000 years ago. It happened while they were dredging the pond. Dredging is the practice of removing settlements and debris that have settled over time on the bottom of bodies of water. Spears, knives, arrowheads, and fragments of pottery were all found during the dredging operation. The artifacts have been traced back to a mysterious American tribe that not a lot of people know about. Archaeologists refer to this enigmatic culture as the Mississippians, who, of course, got their name from being located near the Mississippi River. They believe the artifacts were left over by the Mississippians after leaving their great city of Cahokia. When the city was abandoned around 1,000 years ago, Cahokia was an ancient city estimated to be about 2,200 acres in land. The natives who left the settlement paddled upriver and set up multiple communities along the Mississippi. The treasures in Wisconsin were probably left behind by these very people. And what's really interesting is that the life and death of Mississippian culture has never really been able to be explained. Experts don't know why exactly they abandoned their capital, or where many of them went when they vanished without a trace. But the artifacts left behind remind us of their once great civilization. Number 3. Mysterious skulls. In Tallahassee, a couple of skulls were found in Lake Jackson. At first, the community was worried that there was some kind of crazed murderer on the loose, dumping human heads into the lake. The lake was temporarily drained, and that was when all of the skulls were uncovered. But just recently, the Leon County Sheriff's Office announced that the skulls were not being investigated as part of a criminal investigation. Instead, the skulls likely have historic origins. They were handed over to archaeologists working with the National Park Services. According to Jeffrey Shanks, the man responsible for investigating the mysterious skulls, they could have come from an ancient site near the lake that nobody has ever found. Either 30 years or 13,000 years ago, the skulls were buried or disposed of in the lake and not found until today. The big mystery is trying to figure out where the skulls came from, and if there is a prehistoric site of interest located right under the locals' noses, maybe even underneath the lake bed itself. If that is the case, it's definitely worth investigating. Number 2. Black Death coins. In England, a guy with a metal detector made yet another mind-blowing discovery. 2 rare gold coins were unearthed that date back to the time of the Black Death in the middle of the 14th century, which killed millions of people. Each medieval coin had the image of Edward III, King of England, who first introduced gold as a material for making coins in 1344. Oddly enough, some of the first gold coins minted in England were considered failures, because they were valued at more than they were actually worth. It was a confusing time for currencies, as England tried to work out a system that made some kind of sense. The coins were found in Norfolk County in 2019, but it took a while for archaeologists to finish assessing them. The big mystery was trying to figure out why they were stuck in the ground and how they got there in the first place. Archaeologists have come up with two possible reasons. Either somebody lost a purse by accident and the coins were buried as the years went by, or it was part of a larger hidden hoard, and for whatever reason, two of the coins were left behind. Even today, the coins are very valuable. Each one is about 96% pure gold. Plus, considering their historical significance, they could fetch a lot of money at auction. Back in 1344, the two coins together would have been the equivalent of $16,700 in current money. Just imagine walking around with a pair of $8,000 bills in your pocket. We wouldn't mind trying that out. Number 1. Sunken Chinese relics. Mysterious Chinese artifacts have been discovered off the coast of Singapore, scattered around the floor of the ocean along with a pair of shipwrecks. One of which dates back to the 14th century, and the other all the way back to the 18th century. Both vessels, even though they are 400 years apart, were carrying Chinese ceramics as their main cargo. The ships sailed during what is known as the Tallahassee period of Singapore, around the time that it began appearing on maps in the Ming Dynasty between 1368 and 1644. The more recent vessel has been identified as the Shah Muncha, which sank in 1796 as it was on its way to India from China. The older vessel is the more mysterious one, with archaeologists not knowing its name, why it sank, or even where it was going. As for the artifacts, they were mostly pieces of pottery vessels, crafted in China to be traded with other kingdoms in the area. One of the scientists studying the artifacts says that a set of blue and white dishes that were recovered is one of the largest sets of its kind, remaining still intact from the period. Some of the heaviest artifacts discovered on the ships were 4 massive anchors weighing close to 2.5 tons apiece. The other finds include 14th century instruments such as tambourines and coconut shakers. Though they learned much, archaeologists must put more research into the 2 shipwrecks and recovered artifacts in order to learn more about the ocean-based trading of the time period.
Number 10. The Crocodile and the Backpacker. A crocodile in Australia got some very satisfying revenge after frightening a young backpacker who got the idea that it would be totally fun to bully and mock the marine reptile. The tourist spotted the crocodile from his fishing boat and wanted to get some pictures with it. Well, saltwater crocs are not the most photogenic things on the planet and aren't really into photo shoots. This particular beast was about 16 feet. The tourist teased and pointed at it while someone else snapped photos. This didn't make the crocodile very happy, and when it got close enough to the tourist, it tried to jump into his boat and bite his limbs off. The Israeli backpacker reacted quickly enough to escape the jaws of the crocodile, but he was left severely shaken. He was quoted later as saying, "I didn't realize crocs were so aggressive." But really, who in their right mind doesn't instinctively know that a giant green lizard isn't aggressive? It's like reaching out and trying to touch a rattlesnake, not realizing that, it's a deadly snake. In the end, the tourist went about the rest of his fishing trip with both eyes open for marauding crocodiles. Number 9. Rabid fox attack. A wild fox in Rochester Mills finally had enough. It was tired of being treated like a pesky raccoon and decided one morning it was going to strike back against the rude people in the neighborhood who weren't paying him any respect. It was about 10:30 in the morning when the fox strolled into the yard of Sylvia Work as she was weeding her flower bed. When Sylvia went to wash her hands, the fox was there ready to strike. It began running straight for her, hell-bent on tearing the old lady to shreds. Sylvia screamed for help, but nobody came. The fox had almost completed its planned vengeance. It was biting her in the leg, puncturing her skin with its tiny teeth, and cutting apart her hands as it scratched and scratched. Thankfully, her 14-year-old neighbor rushed to her rescue. He had heard the woman screaming from next door and came to see what the fuss was about. The teenage neighbor grabbed hold of the fox while another neighbor ran to their house to get a dog kennel. After the terrifying ordeal, the fox was handed over to the Pennsylvania Game Commission and Sylvia had to be taken to the hospital for treatment. She just better hope the fox is never let loose again, or it'll probably go back to finish the job. Number 8. The bear selfie. A man who tried to take a selfie with a bear without asking the animal's permission ended up dead. It's really as simple as that. The bear couldn't believe the man's audacity when he strolled straight up to the bear, who was wounded by the way, and tried to snap a picture with the wild animal as if they were best friends. The bear was not impressed. Instead of smiling for the camera, the bear attacked the rude man with both paws, slapping the sense out of him. The guy was dead on the spot, ripped to shreds by the wild beast. If you're wondering just how this guy came face to face with a bear in the first place, it happened while he was driving with a group of friends home from a wedding that they had just attended. He stopped on the side of the road to relieve himself in the forest. That was when he saw the bear a short way off minding its own business. The man zipped himself up, pulled out his camera, and then went and got himself killed. Number 7. Pig escape. The love of a mother pig for her piglets knows no bounds. A mother pig recently got some pretty sweet revenge on a farmer after she made a daring escape. It happened when the pig, whose name is Matilda, escaped from a farm in the United Kingdom. She was pregnant and didn't want to give birth on the farm where she knew her babies would eventually be slaughtered and probably eaten. So she managed to escape the farm and find a safe place to give birth in a nearby forest. She was then spotted by a dog walker who got a hold of the Brinsley Animal Rescue. The animal conservationists aren't allowed to just steal the pig and her piglets, as they did technically belong to the farmer. But what they did do was start a huge campaign to have the pigs and the piglets brought to a home where they could live the rest of their lives in peace and happiness. The campaign was a failure. The farmer figured out where the pigs were and he went and took them back to the farm. But Matilda's revenge wasn't over just yet. At this point, her story was national news. There was a huge protest after the public found out that the farmer had taken the pig and her piglets back, and facing immense pressure, he finally relinquished the family of pigs. Matilda won the battle and earned a full life for her and her babies, and the farmer was thoroughly annoyed and humiliated. He also lost whatever money he would have made by slaughtering the pig family. Number 6. Walrus sinks Navy vessel. A Russian naval ship was on a scientific expedition in the Arctic when it came under attack by an angry walrus. The expedition was part of a joint mission with the Russian Geographical Society. The ship anchored near a small archipelago slightly south of the North Pole called Franz Josef Land. The crew were about to make landfall in an inflatable boat when they were attacked by the angry female walrus who was simply trying to defend her territory. The rude Russians were basically trespassing, so the walrus took her revenge. The researchers were forced to flee their inflatable vessel as the walrus made her assault. The servicemen were able to get away, but the walrus did so much damage to their boat that it sank. They still made it to shore and got away from the walrus, but they were stranded from the main vessel. They also had to run out of the area because the walrus was still on the prow, waiting to finish off the job. Eventually, they were rescued by the main ship, but it was quite an ordeal for the crew. Number 5. Revenge of the street dogs. A pack of street dogs got some very juicy revenge on a man in China. It happened when the guy was trying to park his car. There was a stray dog sitting in his parking spot, so he got out of his vehicle and kicked the dog in its face. The stray dog whimpered and ran away, and then the man moved his car into the parking spot. After he'd gone, the dog returned with a small group of dog friends to seek revenge. They absolutely trashed this guy's vehicle. About 5 stray dogs returned to the parking lot and began biting and chewing on his windshield wipers, his fenders, and everything else they could get their teeth on. They did thousands of dollars worth of damage to this guy's car and then ran away before he could show up. The attack was even witnessed by a neighbor who filmed the devastation. He probably thought it was pretty funny, and so did the dogs, but the owner of the vehicle was furious. Unfortunately for him, his insurance probably doesn't cover animal revenge. But maybe he'll think about that the next time he wants to kick his dog. Number 4. Cecil's revenge. In 2015, an American dentist named Walter Palmer paid $50,000 to a local ranger in Zimbabwe to lure Cecil the Lion out of his nature park. Palmer then shot and killed the lion using a bow and arrow. He killed the most majestic cat on the planet and made things extremely difficult for himself. We don't need to talk about how disgusting Walter Palmer is or why killing lions is bad. We all know why. What we can say is that Cecil the Lion, even in death, got her revenge in the form of karma. Walter Palmer quickly became the most hated man in America. This is what the internet did to Walter Palmer after he killed the lion. First, they published his phone number. Secondly, they discovered the address of his dental practice and posted it online. His business page on Facebook was absolutely ruined. Thousands of people called him a scumbag to the point where the page had to be deleted. His Yelp account was also totally ruined. In the end, Walter Palmer didn't lose his practice, and he continued to be a dentist, but he has to live the rest of his life as one of the most unanimously hated people in American history. And yes, he's probably lost a significant amount of business. Number 3. Plague of Crows. Just when citizens of Rome thought it was safe to come out of their houses following the worst of the coronavirus pandemic, the crows decided to get some revenge. It's not clear what exactly sparked the plague of crows that descended on Rome in 2021, but according to the New York Times, they were out of control. Locals were forced to shield themselves with umbrellas, people pulled jackets over their heads, and some brandished wooden sticks to beat the crows away. The angry birds were swooping from the rooftops, grabbing women by their hair, scratching people with their talons, and pecking at them with their beaks. Believe it or not, Rome is almost always under constant siege by angry birds. Every year, the exploding crow population takes their anger out on annoying humans, and when that's all said and done, predatory seagulls descend upon the city and drop bird poop on everyone's heads. It's actually become something of a war, as local residents beg the government to get rid of the crows and to stop the birds from settling in Rome. This only makes the birds angrier, and the crow attacks get more vicious each and every year. The reason crows love living in Rome is that there is so much trash, garbage, and mice for them to eat. The humans are simply in their way. Number 2. Revenge of the Lioness. During a circus performance in Russia, a tormented lioness fought back against her cruel trainer in a shocking display of feline revenge. It happened during a performance done by the Ural Traveling Circus. Terrified spectators shouted and scrambled out of the circus tent as Vega the lioness went wild and turned on her tamer. Her tamer, one Maxim Orlov, was trying to get the animal to perform like a circus freak. It was all part of his act. But the lioness was tired of performing. She pounced on Maxim with her jaws open and her teeth showing. She bit him multiple times before other members of the circus were able to get the big cat off. Maxim had to be transported to the hospital immediately, though he did manage to survive his injuries. There was also a woman in the crowd who witnessed the attack and was so shocked that she had an epileptic seizure. As for Vega, the poor lioness will be traded to a zoo for a smaller lion cub that's easier to control. It's good news for Vega, as hopefully she can have a relatively normal life outside the circus. It's bad news for the newest lion cub, who will most likely be taken away from their family and forced to literally jump between hoops. Number 1. Drunk Monkey Revenge. In India, there's a monkey named Kalua who has been imprisoned for his entire life. That's right, this monkey actually got a full lifetime prison sentence. He's been locked up in a Kanpur zoo following a wild rampage in which he got wasted on stolen booze and attacked at least 250 people. According to the New York Post, zookeepers at the park were hoping to assimilate the monkey into their little monkey society. However, now he's been deemed too dangerous to live among his own kind, and he certainly can't be out in the wild getting drunk and attacking people. Based on local reports, the monkey had originally belonged to some kind of occultist hermit, who fed Kalua a steady diet of hard liquor and meat harvested from other monkeys. The occultist basically turned the creature into an alcoholic cannibal. The occultist was found dead, and the neglected monkey took out his anger and frustration on the neighborhood people, swinging from building to building, breaking into people's houses, and clawing women and children in the face. The rampage went on for quite some time before Kalua was eventually captured by animal trappers and delivered to the zoo. According to the zoo director, there's been absolutely no change in his behavior, and he remains highly aggressive to the outside world. 3 years after the monkey's brutal rampage, the zookeepers have all but given up on it. He'll be kept in solitary confinement for the rest of his life. It's extremely sad because it's not the monkey's fault he was raised that way, but it's just the way things turned out.
Number 11. Dolavira Stepwell. In 2014, news reports announced the alleged discovery of a 5,000-year-old stepwell in the Indus Valley city of Dolavira in present-day northwestern India. It's the largest ancient reservoir found in the country to date, measuring 240 feet, about 73 meters long, 96 feet, or 29.3 meters wide, and 33 feet, or about 10 meters, deep. The structure is nearly 3 times bigger than the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, in what is now Pakistan, which represents the earliest public water tank of the ancient world. At the time of the Dolavira stepwell's discovery, researchers announced plans to continue investigating the site in hopes of studying water flow patterns, ancient water conservation efforts, and evidence of manufacturing that they found, including beads and semi-precious stones. Stepwells, which are ponds or wells with stairs descending into them, were used for both practical and religious purposes. They also served as monuments, with some bearing elaborate carvings. News of the stepwell at Dolavira perplexed officials from the Archaeological Survey of India, or ASI, who pointed out that the site was discovered roughly 15 years earlier and was not exactly news. Speaking with Scroll.in, archaeological engineer Vilas Jadhav further explained that just because a well has steps, it does not mean it's a stepwell. Experts conceded that the structure, which was built around 2500 BCE, is still impressive in its own right, but they contested the seemingly miscalculated claims by the media. Number 10. Roman military camp. Sometime during the 2nd century BCE, around 10,000 Roman soldiers built a sprawling 49-acre or 20 hectares military camp in what is now Melgaço, Portugal. The site, known as Lomba de Morda, served as a temporary fortification, for soldiers who were crossing the Labrador Mountain between the Lima and Minho rivers. Used for short periods, sometimes just days or weeks, during the summer months, the camp was situated along a route that traversed high ground for safety reasons. Temporary accommodations like these are difficult to detect because they left behind little archaeological evidence, and the Roman army often destroyed them before leaving. Researchers discovered Lomba de Murdo using remote sensing techniques. Until now, they knew of several mentionings and writing sources of Roman soldiers crossing through different valleys, but they didn't know exactly where this occurred. The site is the oldest known camp of its time in Galicia, in northern Portugal. Its exact age is unknown, but experts believe it may be linked to the campaign of Roman consul Decimus Junius Brutus in 137 BCE, a time when Rome was increasingly advancing on northwest Iberia. Number 9. Prehistoric cabin. A handful of carbonized bamboo fragments found in southwestern China's Sichuan province are from a Neolithic cabin dating back 4,500 years, according to archaeologists from the Chengdu Cultural Relics and Archaeological Research Institute. Discovered among the ruins of Baodun, ancient town, the artifacts represent the oldest known evidence of a bamboo mud-style building on the Chengdu Plain. In addition to the structure, the team found tens of thousands of pottery pieces, dozens of stoneware fragments, and suspected rice paddy ruins. The items resemble objects found at nearby excavations of Sangshuingdui sites, which came after Baodun was established. Based on the similarities between the artifacts, scientists believe that by further exploring Baodun, they can learn more about the mysterious Sangshuingdui culture. The ruins at Baodun are the largest and earliest remains of a prehistoric town along the upper reaches of the Yangtze River, as well as the earliest mass settlement site on the Chengdu Plain and the birthplace of rice cultivation in the region, CGTN reported. Sites like this challenge the long-held notion that the Yellow River Valley was the sole origin of ancient Chinese civilization. Number 8. Mystery Bronze Age structure. Since its discovery on a small hill in northern Italy in 2005, experts have been trying to figure out what a wooden structure, known as the Noceto Vasca Votiva, was used for. Built sometime between 1600 and 1300 BCE, during the Late Bronze Age, the oak contraption is slightly larger than a backyard swimming pool, according to the Cornell Chronicle. Using dendrochronology, the practice of dating an object or event based on a tree's annual growth rings, and radiocarbon dating, a team of researchers from Cornell University recently determined that the structure's upper tank was built in 1432 BCE, and that its lower tank was built in 1444 BCE. They pinpointed these dates with 95% certainty, allotting for a margin of error of 4 years. A newly published paper describes how the Noceto Vasca Votiva was built during a time of major societal change in the region, which was characterized by fewer larger settlements, more specialized manufacturing, and changes in burial practices. Due to its location atop a hill, the structure was probably not used as a well or reservoir, and it contained a collection of artifacts that appear to have been deliberately deposited into it, including figurines, ceramic pottery, and stone and wood objects. The evidence indicates that it was likely used for a supernatural water ritual of some sort. Number 7. Bronze Age homes. Central Europe's largest early Bronze Age settlement, nicknamed the German Stonehenge, is located roughly 85 miles or 137 kilometers southwest of Berlin in Saxony-Anhalt. More formally known as Ringheiligtum Pulmulta, the Neolithic site dates back to the late 3rd millennium BC and contains an arrangement of 7 concentric wooden rings. Excavations at the site have turned up gruesome finds, including mutilated bodies of women and children, with some bearing evidence of severe head trauma and rib fractures from around the time they died. Researchers long believed that the site was used for seasonal sacrificial rituals and religious events, but recent excavations found a 2-house dwelling, indicating that people may have lived at Ringheiligtum Pulmulta. Archaeologists uncovered further signs of permanent habitation, including 20 ditches, numerous burials, and 80 complete house plans encompassing 130 dwellings. Most of the homes date back to around 2200 BCE, during the time of the Unyjetsa culture, but some are even older, originating around 2800 BCE and bearing the signs of the Bell Beaker culture. Archaeologists are continuing to explore this newly discovered residential zone in hopes of learning more about the Unyayetsa culture's social and religious customs. Number 6. Death masks of Mycenae. While excavating the ancient Greek city of Mycenae in 1876, German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann discovered 7 gold funerary masks that were placed on the faces of buried bodies. He was convinced that one of the masks belonged to King Agamemnon, a Mycenaean king mentioned in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. While the mask was ultimately dated to 400 years before Agamemnon's time, it's still famously known as Agamemnon's mask. Bearing the image of a man who appeared to have died around age 30, it stands out against the other masks, which are simple and lack specific features. Speaking with Xinhua news outlet, Konstantinos Pascadili, curator of antiquities at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, explained that whoever the man was, he was considered royalty and was buried with full honors, and that all the recipients of the gold masks were important people. The masks are largely a mystery to this day, especially since the people who lived in the region were rather poor until around 1600 BCE, when they suddenly became extremely wealthy. Experts don't know how or why this happened, where the gold for the masks was sourced from, or where the Mycenaeans got the idea of covering the faces of their dead with gold. Number 5. Shamanic snake staff. During recent excavations at a late Stone Age dig site northwest of Helsinki in southern Finland, a team of researchers discovered a 4,400-year-old wooden staff shaped like a snake. They believed that the Neolithic shaman may have used the 21-inch long or 53-centimeter stick for magic rituals. According to a new study, carved from a single piece of wood, the piece depicts a long, slithering snake with an open mouth. The team that conducted the research believes that it may represent a grass snake or a European adder, but not everyone agrees. A researcher not involved in the study told Live Science that, in her opinion, the depiction more accurately represents a viper. She further added that the viper has historically played a significant role in folk religion and magic. The shaman who owned the stick likely used it for rituals and possibly for talking to the dead. The people who lived in the area believed that it contained a land of the dead, according to ART News, and snakes represented an intermediary of sorts between the real and spiritual world. This dig site was discovered by accident in the 1950s by a ditch digging team, but excavations since then have been intermittent. Scientists believe the settlement was inhabited from 4000 BCE to 2000 BCE. Number 4. Roman Basilica. Israel's largest known Roman-era basilica was just discovered in Tel Ashkelon National Park near the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. Founded by Herod the Great, the first-century structure functioned as a public building where citizens carried out business transactions, met for social and legal reasons, and held performances and religious ceremonies, according to the Israel Antiquities Authority, or IAA. Measuring 360 feet, or 110 meters long, and 130 feet, or 40 meters wide, the building boasted a colonnade consisting of 40 feet, columns, and had a central space flanked by 2 side halls. Around 200 marble objects at the site were imported from Asia Minor during the 2nd century. In 363 AD, the basilica sustained heavy damage from an earthquake along the Dead Sea and was abandoned. Some of the building's marble was repurposed centuries later under the Abbasid and Fatimid caliphates. In addition to the building itself, the team found coins dating back to Herod's rule, which lasted from 37 BCE to 4 BCE. This isn't the first time archaeologists unearthed the 2,000-year-old site. Back in the 1920s, British archaeologist John Garstang discovered and reburied the structure. Recent excavations began in 2008 and are ongoing, with the ultimate goal of restoring the site to its former glory. Number 3. 1,000-year-old egg. Based on chicken egg fragments discovered throughout Israel, archaeologists know that poultry farming came to the region over 2 millennia ago. Recently, they found an incredibly rare intact egg while excavating a cesspit in the ancient city of Yavna. It was incredibly well preserved, owing to the oxygen-free human waste it sat in for around 1,000 years. Staff members, unfortunately, managed to crack the egg while removing it, despite taking utmost precautions. Whoops. Most of its contents were lost, but part of the yolk was saved, and the researchers preserved it with plans to perform a DNA analysis. The crack was also repaired thanks to the director of the IAA's Organic Materials Conservation Laboratory. In addition to the egg, the team found 3 dolls made from bone, which were customary toys of the period, as well as an oil lamp unique to the late Abbasid period, which was used for dating the egg. Israel is also home to Maresha, one of the earliest known sites with evidence of chicken farming. The practice appears to have arrived there around 2300 years ago, after the conquest of Jerusalem by Alexander the Great. Number 2. Shark attack victim. Roughly 3,000 years ago, a man living in Japan was brutally attacked by a shark. He died with hundreds of injuries to his arms, legs, chest, and abdomen, and was buried at the Tsukumo site near Japan's Sato Inland Sea. Experts from the University of Oxford were baffled when they first examined his remains, wondering what could have possibly caused such horrific wounds. A thorough analysis of the injuries ruled out human conflict and more common animal predators and scavengers, leaving the team to conclude that a tiger shark or a white shark mauled the unfortunate individual to death. Based on the number of tooth marks on the skeleton, the attack likely lasted a while. Researcher Rick Schulting told CNN that evidence of shark attacks on humans is rare in the archaeological record, which makes sense, since there are only a handful of fatal shark attacks on humans throughout the world today. The mutilated remains represent the oldest known evidence of such an occurrence. Number 1. Europe's oldest wine. Greece is one of Europe's oldest winemaking regions. The practice may have even originated there, according to a new study detailing the discovery of Europe's oldest wine near ancient Philippi in northern Greece. It was there, in a single house, that archaeologists found thousands of ancient grape seeds and ceramics containing equally old traces of wine. The evidence was preserved after a fire broke out around 4300 BCE and destroyed the home. Spanning roughly 11 acres or 4.5 hectaacres, the Illicit site is a tell or a mound, which grew over thousands of years as humans repeatedly built over the site. Looming nearly 50 feet or about 15 meters above the surrounding area, the layers extend as far deep as 55 feet or about 17 meters below ground. Researchers only recently discovered and began excavating the lower levels at Illicit, which contain evidence of the little-studied early and middle Neolithic people who lived there. The prehistoric wine was discovered among these layers and presents interesting questions about the role of alcohol in the ancient society's culture, and any problems they may have experienced due to alcohol consumption. Furthermore, archaeologists hope to learn more in general about the societies who occupied the site during these early periods, including their social and economic organization.
Nine. The Flecheros. The Flecheros, whose name means arrow shooters, are an uncontacted tribe that lives in the Javari region of the Brazilian Amazon, near the Peruvian border. So little is known about them, even their language and exact ethnicity are mysteries. What we do know is that this group is extremely skilled with bows and poison arrows, hence their nickname, and some have learned the hard way that they don't hesitate to shoot at intruders. Journalist Scott Wallace is one of the very few people who've ever come face to face with the Flecheros. In 2002, he ventured into their territory with the noble goals of protecting the tribe and their resource-filled land. His mission involved assessing the group's health, which had to be done from a distance as to not transmit dangerous germs that the Flecheros have no natural resistance or immunity to. Sadly, the Brazilian government has scaled back on its funding for protecting its uncontacted tribes over recent years, leaving groups like the Flecheros increasingly vulnerable to the outside world. In 2017, a group of gold miners who had just finished an illegal job in the Amazon bragged while out at a bar about how they murdered 10 Flecheros members they encountered in the rainforest. As if bragging about murder wasn't enough, the killers had tools and other personal effects they had taken from the slain bodies as trophies to prove their story was true. Pretty terrible if you ask us. The horrific ordeal drew widespread criticism against the Brazilian government for slashing its budget on protecting the vulnerable indigenous groups. Many suspect that these needless killings happen more often than anyone realizes, since they tend to occur in extremely remote regions, far from the scrutiny of mainstream society or law enforcement. 8. The Korowai. The Korowai, also called the Kolufo, are a small group of around 3,000 to 4,000 people who live in the Indonesian province of Papua, near the Papua New Guinea border. They were supposedly completely unaware of the outside world's existence until anthropologists sought them out during the 1970s, according to the Daily Telegraph. This group of hunter-gatherers is one of the only known untouched tribes to practice cannibalism, although this custom may be declining due to outside intervention and mixed feelings within the tribe. Traditional beliefs held that when a man is overtaken by a witch's power in a state known as kakua, the only way to expel the unwelcome presence is to kill and eat its host. Thank goodness we don't have to do that when we get sick. The Korowai people do smoke tobacco, but they don't drink alcohol, and typically do not live past middle age due to their lack of medical knowledge. Men usually have several wives, and leadership is based on the personal qualities of influential individuals called big men. Contact between the Korowai and outsiders is fairly common, although some communities are largely unaware of the world beyond their homeland and are known for being hostile towards unfamiliar people. Korowai communities have also been known to feud with one another. The further one ventures into the rainforest, the more likely they are to come across a Korowai village that has had little exposure to any culture other than its own, according to Paul Raffaele, who interacted with the tribe firsthand in 2006. Writing for Smithsonian Magazine, Raffaele argued that the Korowai have no more than one generation left of their traditional culture, as young men and women become increasingly assimilated with mainstream society. It's sad to lose out on a traditional culture, even if they do practice cannibalism. But this seems to be a growing trend amongst the tribe. 7. Nomole. Also known as the Cuyareño people and Nomole, the Mashco-Piro are a tribe of nomadic hunter-gatherers who live in Manu National Park in the Madre de Dios region of southeastern Peru. Found in some of the most remote parts of the Amazon, they actively avoid contact with non-indigenous people. The term Mashco-Piro translates to savage in the Piro language and is considered to be insulting. Instead, the group calls themselves the Nomole. They speak a dialect of the Piro language and live in a community of raised wooden homes deep in the rainforest, where they craft spears out of bamboo reeds and ferment fruit into alcohol. The group's population dwindled after rubber industry kingpin Carlos Fermin Fitzcarrald hired a private army to slaughter the Nomole in 1984. By 1976, the tribe's numbers hit an all-time low of somewhere between 20 and 100. In 1998, the International Workgroup for Indigenous Affairs estimated the Nomole population at somewhere between 100 and 250. Today, the group is thought to number somewhere between 600 and 800, with the numbers continuing to grow. In recent years, the Nomole have increasingly interacted with the outside world. Experts speculate that a food shortage could be to blame, but nobody really knows why the tribe is finally emerging from isolation. Despite their occasional willingness to engage with non-indigenous people, the Nomole will not hesitate to attack or kill someone they perceive as a threat. The Peruvian government discourages contact between the Nomole and outsiders, but also has its own plan in place to pursue what's known as controlled contact. Meanwhile, activists are campaigning for the authorities and everyone else to leave the Nomole alone entirely. What do you think? Should outsiders leave the Nomole alone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. The Protected Sentinelese. North Sentinel Island is part of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands archipelago, located in India's Bay of Bengal. It's home to an indigenous tribe called the Sentinelese, who experts know very little about, due to their long-established history of violently rejecting contact with the outside world. For thousands of years, the tribe has lived in near-complete isolation, speaking a language that nobody else in the world knows. The Sentinelese have attacked or killed nearly everyone who has tried approaching them. They're so hostile, authorities have even decided against trying to retrieve the bodies of slain outsiders to avoid further violence. Nobody knows why these Sentinelese are so quick to attack, although a good guess is that they simply want to be left alone. But their self-imposed seclusion benefits them because they have no natural immunity or resistance to a handful of modern diseases and sicknesses. Most people are able to survive them, but they could easily kill tribe members. In 1956, the Indian government implemented legislation banning visitors from going within 5 nautical miles of Andaman Island for their safety and ours. Only a select handful of professionals have been allowed there since, including Indian anthropologist Trilokanath Pandit, whose team established the first and only peaceful interaction with the Sentinelese in 1991. Some people have ignored the ban against visiting Andaman Island, with deadly consequences. The most recent case happened in 2018 when a 26-year-old American Christian missionary named John Chow paid fishermen to illegally ferry him to the island. Chow knew the dangers associated with going near the Sentinelese, but he was so intent on spreading Christianity to the tribe, even though he didn't know the language and they certainly didn't speak English, he still went anyway. He tried multiple times to get to shore on a kayak, but he was only met with arrows every time. Eventually, the men who ferried the missionary saw the Sentinelese dragging Chow's lifeless body. The fishermen who helped Chow reach the off-limits island were arrested and charged for their crimes. But the Indian government did not prosecute the Sentinelese for killing invaders. Considering all that is known about the tribe, the answer to avoiding a volatile encounter is simple: follow the law and stay away from their island. 5. The hidden Awa. The Awa people of Brazil live deep in the Amazon basin, numbering no more than 350. They are considered to be the world's most threatened indigenous group, with at least 100 of those 350 members having had no contact with the outside world. The Awa lived in small settlements until the early 19th century, when they were forced to become nomadic in order to escape European attackers and encroachers. During that time, the invaders removed most of the forest of the Awa's territory. Although some of the Awa moved on to government-established settlements during the 1980s, most continued to live in nomadic extended family groups, numbering only a few dozen members. The Brazilian government implemented measures to protect the Awa in 1982 due to some increased violence with local settlers who were also destroying the tribe's land. Writing for Vanity Fair, Alex Shumatov explains that the Awa people are smaller in stature than your typical human, which is believed to be an adaptation to life in the jungle, enabling tribe members to traverse the rugged terrain and dense vegetation with ease compared to the average-sized person. Families go on extended hunting and gathering trips that can last several weeks. They also have been documented keeping primates as pets. The tribe stays as invisible as possible to the outside world as a way to protect themselves from being pushed out of their territory. Members of this elusive group are rarely seen. In fact, they're so good at remaining hidden, some people have even questioned whether they still actually exist. Footage of an Awa tribesman that was captured in 2019 by a neighboring tribe proves that this tribe is very much real. But as deforestation continues, NGOs like Survival International are working to protect uncontacted tribes and fight for rights of indigenous people. 4. Taromenane. There are only 2 remaining indigenous groups in Ecuador that we know of, who purposefully remain isolated from the outside world. One of them is called the Taromenane, which has an estimated 150 to 300 members left, and is located in the Yasuni National Park. The Taromenane live as nomads in a distinctly inhospitable part of the jungle. They don't wear clothes, and they speak a language unlike any other, according to a Newsweek article by Dolores Ochoa. Little else is known about their lifestyle, culture, and customs, because the tribe adamantly rejects contact with outsiders to protect themselves. Illegal logging and oil development within the jungle threaten this shrinking population, and the Ecuadorian government's failure to protect the tribe amounts to an uncertain future for the Taromenane at best. A plan to stop oil drilling in the group's territory failed to secure the necessary funding and was scrapped in 2013. There are even unfortunate rumors that some loggers, along with other workers, are known to kill tribe members. Several indigenous groups in Yasuni National Park have been decimated by disease brought on by increased proximity with outsiders, according to Survival International. This could easily happen to the Taromenane too, who have no natural resistance or immunity to diseases from outside their small territory. 3. Piripkura. There are only 2 known living members left of the Piripkura tribe in west-central Brazil's Mato Grosso state. They are an uncle and nephew named Pakie and Tamandua, and they live a nomadic lifestyle, striving to maintain their separation from the rest of society at all costs. Illegal loggers slaughtered most of the 20 members of the Piripkura tribe during the 1980s, and protection didn't come to the group until 2008, when the Brazilian government demarcated a parcel of land in the Amazon, specifically for Pakie and Tamandua. The pair consciously chose to continue living in isolation from the rest of the world, demonstrating their resilience and their dedication to their way of life, even after their fellow tribe members were brutally killed. A 2017 documentary called Piripkura follows the researchers from FUNAI, the Brazilian government agency tasked with protecting indigenous rights, on their mission to prove that the 2 men are still alive. Pakie and Tamandua willingly approached the filmmakers after a torch they'd been burning for 18 years went out. FUNAI workers performed some medical exams on the men, relit their torch, and then parted ways. Since then, activist efforts have focused on protecting the pair through legislation, designating a parcel of land just for them. 2. Chimbu skeleton dancers. In the central highlands of Papua New Guinea, there's a little-known tribe called the Chimbu. Their first known interaction with outsiders happened when Australian explorers encountered the group in 1934. The Chimbu are unique for the dances they perform, dressed as skeletons to scare enemy tribes. This tradition was developed with the idea that their enemies would not perceive them as human and would believe the dancers have supernatural powers. Very little is known about this extremely remote and isolated group, who live in rugged mountain valleys. Traditionally, men live separately from women and children in dispersed settlements, but the Chimbu are starting to live as family units, Violet Johnson wrote for The Guardian. Their houses are oval or rectangular and are made from flattened reeds, with dirt floors and thatched roofs. As the skeleton dancers attract tourists, the tribe has started performing for the public rather than strictly ritualistic reasons. But the rest of their culture and customs remain, for the most part, a mystery. 1. Ayoreo. The Ayoreo indigenous peoples territory straddles the border between Paraguay and Bolivia. Numbering around 5,000, they're divided into subgroups that are rumored to sometimes be hostile towards one another and to outsiders. But this small society of hardy survivors has more reasons to fear the rest of the world than we have to fear them. Historically, the Ayoreo were hunter-gatherers. Today, some live and work on Mennonite cattle ranches for very little pay. Sadly, the society's lifestyle and culture have been severely disrupted in a very short time by people wanting to develop their land. One subgroup, the Totobiego-Sode, had minimal contact with others until they were forcibly resettled during the 1970s and 80s. As a result, many died from illness and malnutrition. Today's Ayoreo communities largely lack modern conveniences like electricity, medical care, and clean water. Diseases like malaria and tuberculosis are common. Moreover, the group's housing is ramshackle, and they often encounter violence from non-Ayoreo people. The Ayoreo are also entangled in an ongoing fight for recognition of their land ownership amid rampant deforestation of the Chaco forest that they call home. As ranchers encroach on the land, indigenous communities in the region face imminent threats to their survival. In 2019, the Ayoreo secured a landmark victory when they received ownership documents for nearly 44,500 acres of their ancestral territory. This does not necessarily mark the end of the group's fight for their rights, but it marks a tremendous step forward in their quest for recognition and protection.
Number 10. Dead dragon? In August 2016, footage of an alleged dragon falling from the sky in Tibet made headlines on social media, sending netizens all over the world into a frenzy. The footage, which supposedly depicts the dead dragon on a beach after it plummeted to Earth, received over 1.5 million views within 3 days of being posted online. While some of the more skeptical, savvy people who witnessed the video decided to go on fact-checking missions, others simply chose to believe that it was real. Thankfully for all of us, Snopes, a popular fact-checking site, was on the case and quickly debunked the claims that the footage showed a real dragon. The site found that the creature shown in the video is a dragon sculpture created for a Spanish television show, which investigates conspiracy theories, cryptozoology, and mythical creatures. The faux dragon was used in a scene for a phony documentary, much like other similar broadcasts that focus on popular myths like Bigfoot, mermaids, and even ones that claim the megalodon still exists. It's not surprising that the show capitalized on people's desire to believe fabled creatures are out there. After all, viewers eat this stuff up. But the plain and simple truth is that the dragon was fake. Don't be disappointed though. As you'll see throughout today's video, our planet was once chock full of animals that once actually existed, and were so huge, strange, and fierce, it's hard to believe they're not fictional. Number 9. Frog-faced turtle. Between 72 and 66 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period, a toothless, frog-like ancient turtle with poorly developed upper and lower jaws lived in what is now the island nation of Madagascar. As a suction-type feeder, the species ate a smaller-bodied living prey. And guess what? They ate them whole, taking no time at all to chew their food. Paleontologist Dr. David Krauss described the prehistoric creature as a stunning example of evolution in isolation. For over 20 million years, the species evolved on Madagascar. A fossilized specimen discovered in 2015 in the northern region of the country is considered the best preserved late Cretaceous turtle among the southern continents, according to Krauss. In a place known for its unique wildlife due to its isolation from the rest of the planet, the fossil shows how the animals who lived on Madagascar tens of millions of years ago were already very distinct from creatures in other parts of the world. The discovery also sheds light on a phenomenon called convergent evolution, which happens when different animals independently evolve similar traits in order to adapt to their surroundings. Number 8. Arctic dinosaurs. Around 70 million years ago, the world was much warmer than it is now. But places like Alaska still experienced below freezing temperatures and snowy winters. For this reason, scientists developed a tendency to overlook the possibility that dinosaurs lived in these environments year-round. But experts recently proved themselves wrong when they discovered the fossils of 7 dinosaur species as much as 250 miles, or about 400 kilometers, north of the Arctic Circle, challenging the long-held belief that all dinosaurs were cold-blooded. This is the furthest north that scientists have ever found dinosaur eggs, and their presence suggests that the creatures overwintered in the Arctic. The prehistoric creatures must have been warm-blooded to some degree. In other words, capable of at least partially warming their bodies via internal functions. In order to survive month-long periods of darkness and extreme cold, according to the lead study author, Pat Druckenmiller. Discoveries like this are helping scientists realize how little we truly know about the dinosaurs and how much we have left to learn. Number 7. Ancient burrowing mammals. Around 120 years ago, in now what is northeastern China, there lived 2 distantly related ancestors of modern-day mammals, who are also the earliest known scratch diggers. In the phenomenon known as convergent evolution, which we discussed earlier, these burrowing creatures independently evolved similar traits to support their lifestyles while living in the ancient Johol biota ecosystem. Originating from the mammaliform group that today's mammals evolved from, the newly described species lived between 145 million and 100 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous period. Armed with specialized traits for digging, they had a short tail, short limbs, and strong forelimbs with well-developed hands. Out of the 2 species discovered, one is based on a foot-long, about 30.5 centimeter species with an elongated spine made up of 38 vertebrae, 12 more than the 26 vertebrae that modern mammals typically have. The other specimen is around 7 inches or 18 centimeters long and is a distant cousin of modern placental mammals and marsupials known as a Eutriconodontan. It had 26 vertebrae, also making it longer than most mammals. Scientists believe that a genetic mutation that occurs during embryonic development is responsible for the animal's elongated spines. This is known to happen in some modern-day mammals too, including elephants, manatees, and hyraxes. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome! If you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Monkeydactyl. In what may very well be the oldest known documented case of a creature with opposable thumbs, scientists recently identified an animal nicknamed the monkeydactyl, which sounds a bit like the flying monkeys from Wizard of Oz. This pterosaur was described based on 160 million-year-old fossilized evidence that was discovered in a forest in modern-day Liaoning, China. This small-bodied creature boasted a wingspan of approximately 33.5 inches, or about 85 centimeters, and it may have been especially adept at climbing and grasping objects, as well as living high up in the trees. Researchers based these findings on 3D imaging, X-ray technology, along with comparisons to other pterosaurs. Simply put, the monkeydactyl had the right build for its suspected lifestyle and habits. These traits would have proven big advantages for the ancient animal by reducing its competition with other species. Not all experts agree with the findings. Speaking with Gizmodo, paleontologist Kevin Padian pointed out that having opposable thumbs is not a guaranteed indicator of tree-dwelling species, citing the example that raccoons have this trait but are not arboreal. Moreover, Padian said that the specimen is too poorly preserved to know for sure if it had opposable thumbs, and that a better preserved fossil might procure more definitive answers. But for now, it is interesting to think about ancient flying monkeys ruling the prehistoric treetops. Number 5. Lystrosaurus. When the supercontinent Pangaea still existed around 270 million years ago, a particular-looking dog-sized creature known as the Lystrosaurus evolved into existence. Resembling a pig-lizard hybrid, this tusked, burrowing animal was armed with powerful front legs and a snub-nosed face, according to National Geographic. In addition to having a unique appearance, the Lystrosaurus was one of the very few life forms to survive the worst mass extinctions that ever occurred on the planet. Caused by a massive volcanic eruption in what is now Siberia. The eruption lasted for a millennium and released copious amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. The event saw a cooling period followed by an intense greenhouse effect, along with the acidification of the world's oceans. Hailing from a group of mammal-like reptiles called therapsids, which eventually evolved into mammals, Lystrosaurus owes its survival at least partially to its ability to spend extended periods of time underground. It was also capable of acquiring enough oxygen from the heavily contaminated air thanks to its robust lungs. These advantages enabled the creature to go on living even after 95% of the Earth's wildlife died out. Lystrosaurus fossils have been found in Africa, China, and Antarctica, lending credibility to the belief that, at one time, the continents were connected. These goofy-looking animals travel great distances over land, and it appears as though they fled south when the volcano erupted in a bid to get as far away from it as possible. And they didn't merely live through the mass extinction. They flourished throughout the catastrophe and its recovery. A 2020 study on the creature's tusks found that hibernation likely played a crucial role in the survival of the Lystrosaurus. After migrating to Antarctica, the creature had to adapt to annual month-long periods of isolated darkness. Its ability to survive via hibernation spared it from having to head back up north towards the volcano, where the environment was far deadlier and less hospitable. Researchers haven't proven that the Lystrosaurus hibernated, but if their suspicions are correct, then this is the world's oldest known case of a backboned animal or a vertebrate hibernated. Number 4. New saber-toothed cat species. North America was once home to one of the largest big cats that ever lived, according to recent research identifying a newly discovered saber-toothed cat species. The massive cat roamed the continent between 9 and 5 million years ago, hunting rhinos and bison. A graduate student rediscovered the animal's huge arm bone several years ago at the University of Oregon's Museum of Natural and Cultural History. Experts were stumped regarding what species it belonged to, and a years-long effort to solve the mystery ensued. Throughout the process, the team collected 7 previously uncategorized fossil specimens, which they used to describe the new species. This cat was closely related to the Smilodon, an ancient saber-toothed species that also once roamed throughout North America. But the new species was much larger, weighing up to 900 pounds or more than 400 kilograms. And it routinely killed prey that weighed as much as 6,000 pounds or about 2,700 kilograms. During the study, the researchers discovered numerous bones belonging to the species in collections throughout the continent, with the largest leg bone they found measuring 18 inches or about 45 centimeters long. To give you an idea of just how big this cat was, a modern adult male lion's humerus is around 5 inches or about 12.5 centimeters shorter, measuring 13 inches or 33 centimeters long on average. This landmark study is just one piece of a larger, far more complicated puzzle, and scientists are continuing to work on disentangling the confusing evolution of saber-toothed cats and how they're related to one another. Number 3. Paraceratherium. The prehistoric world was full of creatures who could dwarf today's largest animals, including modern elephants and giraffes. Among them was the largest mammal that ever lived, a massive rhinoceros called the Paraceratherium. The extinct genus encompassed 6 species that lived throughout what is now Asia, between 23 and 32 million years ago, with the largest specimens measuring over 20 feet, a little over 6 meters tall at the shoulder, and weighing more than 20 tons or 18 metric tons. The animal was roughly 26 feet, about 8 meters long from head to tail, and its head alone measured around 4.3 feet or 1.3 meters long. These gargantuan rhinos were hornless predecessors of modern rhinoceroses, who developed horns much later on in the evolutionary timeline. They dwarfed today's rhinos, elephants, and even the massive woolly mammoths that roamed the Earth during the last ice age. According to scientists, Paraceratherium was one of the last remaining giants to walk the Earth. It outlived other mega-animals amid climate change, resulting in a drier atmosphere during the Oligocene epoch. A recent study describes a newly discovered Paraceratherium species based on remains of these prehistoric beasts found in northwestern China's Gansu province back in 2015. The new species was not the largest of them all, but it was nevertheless gigantic, especially by modern standards. Number 2. Adolotherium. The Adolotherium, or crazy beast, is a prehistoric mammal that lived alongside the dinosaurs around 66 million years ago on the supercontinent Gondwana. Fossils of the creatures, also known as Gondwanatherians, have been found in modern-day Argentina, India, Africa, Antarctica, and Madagascar. Once mistakenly thought to be an ancestor of modern-day sloths, Gondwanatherians are now known to have been a separate, failed evolutionary experiment that led to their eventual extinction around 45 million years ago, according to lead study author and vertebrate paleontologist Dr. David Krauss. Based on the fossilized skeleton of the species Adolotherium hui, which was found in northern Madagascar, experts estimated that the creature weighed less than 7 pounds, or about 3.2 kilograms, making it around the same size as a modern house cat. While this may seem small, a hui was much larger than other mammals that existed at the time. It somewhat resembled a modern badger, which would make it pretty typical by today's standards, but the animal was an anomaly of the prehistoric world. Adolotherium hui was equipped with a more sensitive snout than any other known mammal, which had a large hole on the top, unlike anything ever seen in other animals. It had extra vertebrae, a strangely curved leg bone, and teeth that were unique to the species. The study reveals that A. hui developed its bizarre features over a 20 million year period after Madagascar broke off from Gondwana, leading to notable differences between the species and mainland Gondwanatherians. Number 1. Godzilla shark. 9 years after it was discovered in New Mexico's Manzano Mountains, a 300 million year old fossil, famously known as the Godzilla shark, finally received its scientific name. Dubbed Hoffman's dragon shark, the 6.7 foot long or about 2 meter creature is named for its 12 rows of sharp teeth and its 2.5 foot, or about 77 centimeter, fin spines. The name also hails from the family who owns the land its fossil was discovered on. Today, the Manzano Mountains are in one of the country's driest regions, but sea levels were much higher back during the Godzilla shark's existence, when modern-day New Mexico was submerged beneath a seaway that extended into North America. The species likely dwelled in shallow waters where it fed on crustaceans and fish, according to scientists. It had much shorter teeth than modern sharks. Measuring roughly 0.8 inches or about 2 centimeters long, the shark's chompers were better suited for grasping and crushing prey rather than piercing their targets, according to Jean-Paul Hodnay, the graduate student who discovered the fossil back in 2013. The specimen represents one of the most complete fossilized skeletons ever found among its evolutionary branch, which split from the modern shark lineage around 390 million years ago, according to the Associated Press. It's believed that the Godzilla shark went extinct roughly 60 million years later. We're definitely glad something as terrifying as this is no longer lurking in the ocean. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about fascinating prehistoric creatures, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe. I'll see you next time.